Hi everyone, my name is Diana.
And I'm Nick.
And it's Friday, and that of course means, that it's Team RCIA Friday Facebook Live.
So in this live, we want to talk a little bit about the coming new translation of the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults.
Yeah, we've been getting a little more questions about when do we have to use this new translation? Where do I get it? What's happening with it? And here we want to make sure that you don't panic, because this process has been going on really since you started writing about it in 2018.
Yeah.
I found a blog post from 2018. And so we're going to just do a little brief summary. We did do a webinar that went into deeper detail about this. And we've been doing some blog posts on the new translation. So make sure you check out the website, teamrci.com, to get more in-depth info.
So let's start with, if this is the first you're hearing of this, why is it that we have a new translation?
Well, you know that lots of our ritual texts have already been retranslated. The English text, we've been using the new Roman Missal now for 11 years, really. Can you believe that? And lots of our other sacraments have been updated in the English translation, the order of confirmation, the order of baptism for infants, a ton of other things. And so the Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults is just the next in line for this retranslation.
So what is it exactly that's being translated?
Coming from the Latin text is always called the base text. That is where all of the languages start from, and each continent, each country, each language base does its own translation. And so, long ago, Pope John Paul II called for a new principle of translation that would make things more in line with the Latin meaning. And so the English translation has been retranslated to really bring out more of the nuances that we find in the Latin text.
So the original Latin is not changing at all?
The original Latin is not changing, nothing is changing, and that's a good thing for us because the process itself is not changing. Just the
catechumenate process.
The catechumenate process is not changing. And so all of the things that you've learned about how to facilitate the initiation of adults and children of catechetical age, that's all remaining the same. It's just the prayers that we use, the ritual text that you have, hopefully that you have. The rubrics will be a little bit updated in their language, but the meaning of the rubrics themselves will stay the same.
Now, I remember when we went through the translation for the Roman Missal, there seemed to be a lot of back and forth, and I always thought we were kind of done, and then something else would happen. And so where are we in that back and forth process right now?
So it really is a long multi-year process, and there's lots of colors involved in this process. In terms of the translation levels, we are at what is called the gray book level. That means this version of the translation in English, called the Gray Book, has been approved by the United States bishops. But in order for it to become the White Book, which is the final text, that Gray Book draft needs to be sent to the Vatican, and the Vatican needs to say, yes, this is fine, or as they did with the Roman Missal, say, no, we need to have a few more clarifications and changes, go back and look at these specific parts. And so right now, this translation approved by the U.S. bishops is going to Rome. And once it gets to Rome, who knows how long it might take. We'll tell you what the general timeline will be on that in just a bit.
So you mentioned this is approved by the U.S. bishops.
Yeah.
What's the process with the other English-speaking countries?
So things like places in Canada and Australia, England and Wales, the Philippines, India, all of those countries where English is a majority language for praying in the Catholic Church, they are doing their same process, their own individual process. And so if you live in an English-speaking country outside of the U.S., check with your local bishop or your local worship office and see where your bishops are in their process.
But when we get to that final white book stage, the English translation will be the same everywhere. There's no, like, there won't be a different translation in Australia than there is in the United States.
The translation, the wording itself will be pretty much the same. There may be adaptations that each country will request from the Vatican. So that's another part that the Vatican needs to give their sign off. Any adaptations that the U.S. bishops want to make for our nation, for our church here in the U.S., the Vatican obviously doesn't have a Latin text for that. It's completely created by the U.S. bishops. And so some of those original texts are the combined rites. The combined rites are things that the U.S. bishops put together themselves, and several of the other English-speaking countries have adopted those either formally or informally in their own practice. But the combined rites were never, have never been in the Latin text themselves. And so each continent, each language country will have their own adaptations like that.
But the core of it, the base most of the texts we're familiar with, except for those adaptations, would all be the same in every English-speaking country, which is not the case in Spanish-speaking countries.
No.
So there will be I understand there'll be a U.S. translation of the rite into Spanish, but that will be somewhat unique to the United States.
We already have one. We already have a U.S. Spanish translation that's in a green cover book. It's still the white book for the U.S., but in Spanish. And that Spanish translation is also being updated specifically for use in the U.S.
But it will be the translation used in, say, Mexico or Cuba or Spain
different.
will all be different.
Totally different.
Yeah, okay.
Totally different.
So what are some, I think most people know that the title of the rite is one of the translations that's changing. So it will no longer be the rite of Christian initiation of adults. It will be the order of Christian initiation of adults. Are there other examples of some of the translations where...
Oh, why don't you do some of these?
Well, one is one that kind of impacts me. I wrote a book years ago called The Way of Faith, which comes from a line in the first paragraph. I think it's the first paragraph of the rite. It says that these seekers are entering the way of faith, and so that has been retranslated to beginning the journey of faith. So the title of my book will be
outdated.
I don't think they're going to redo the title of the book, but it's that's one example that struck me right away as a change.
Yeah. Another significant change is in the title of the first public ritual, which currently is called the Rite of Acceptance into the Order of Catechumens. And that is being changed into the Rite of Entrance into the Catechumenate.
Yeah.
And there's some discussion among some of the RCIA leaders in the U.S. about, is this a good change or not? I think it's a good change because it moves us away from the sense of that word acceptance, as in, we are accepting you into the Catholic Church. And that's not exactly accurate. What is happening is that we are accepting them into an order of the church. And so before a person celebrates the rite of acceptance, they have no status in the church. And that's not a bad thing. It just means they have no official role to play in the church. Once a person becomes a catechumen, then they have an official role in the hierarchy. Another word that has its own baggage, but it needs to be interpreted in a better way in the sense of the body of Christ. each role, each order in the body has its own responsibilities and privileges. And so as a catechumen, they have their own responsibilities and privileges within that order. So the new title, Rite of Entrance into the Catechumenate, emphasizes that entryway into that order. In a bad sense, it removes that word order, reminding us that it is part of that hierarchy in the church. What else? What else is changing? Let's see. Let's do this one.
One helpful change will be, this is still something that stumps even long-term team members and people who've been doing this ministry for quite a while. Well, for example, that opening ritual for the rite of entrance into the catechumenate, or the rite of acceptance into the order of catechumens, the language in there talks about the candidate. And it means the candidate for the rite. And there are other places where that happens, when clearly the rite intends to be talking about catechumens, about unbaptized people, not baptized candidates for completing their initiation or being received into full communion. So the new translation will clarify where the candidate for a rite is a catechumen. It will just say catechumen instead of candidate. And then in the rites for the baptized, it will say candidate.
Mm-hmm. Some other really helpful changes, I think, will be in the Easter Vigil, where a lot of the updated translations from the Roman Missal, like the renewal of baptismal promises, the blessing of water, just the simple dialogues, the Lord be with you, and also with you. We used to say that. Now, all of those updated translations that we've already become used to from the Roman Missal, especially in the Easter Vigil, will be incorporated into the ritual text for the rite of Christian initiation of adults. Let's see. Same thing for the order of confirmation. So the order of confirmation had been updated. So the prayer of confirmation, the laying on of hands prayer, that will be within the rite of Christian initiation of adults, the baptismal promises, as we mentioned there.
So another thing that's unique to the U.S. translation, the U.S. version, is a thing called the national statutes. And again, even some longtime team members are not aware that we have national statutes applicable in the United States. Now, some of these statutes are pretty general, and so they would apply in other bishops' conferences. But as far as I know, no other bishops' conference has outlined specific statutes for the catechumenate except the U.S. And that's also being updated. And you're kind of the canon law expert, so how does all that work?
So if you look at the national statutes right now in the back of your U.S. edition, it's pretty lengthy and it's very, very useful. But a lot of it is kind of simply restating what is already within the main body of the ritual text. And so the U.S. bishops thought, well, this is kind of redundant. Let's remove all of the things that are already within the main body of the text and just highlight the things that aren't already there. And these are really mostly clarifications of the process. For example, one clarification that's going to be highlighted in the national statutes is that we should, during the pre-catechumenate period, make sure that we know the history of the person who is seeking initiation, especially in light of marriage issues, because we want to make sure that we attend to those early in the process and not wait until it's too late to do anything. Other things is just clarifying the obligations and the privileges, the rights and responsibilities that catechumens have. Their right to participate in the works of the church, the right to a Catholic education. These kinds of things are just really clarifications. So I think the current, the draft of the national statutes is maybe 2 or 3 pages, nothing very long. Let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, yeah. You want to do the numbering?
Yeah, so again, this is a little bit of a hidden factoid about the rites. So in the Latin Editio Typica, in the base text, the numbering of the paragraphs is different than in the numbering of the paragraphs in the U.S. English translation and the U.S. Spanish translation. Well, in all the English translations, the numbering is different than in the base text. Now, how the numbering is different gets a little complicated, but just know that whatever your numbering is now, if you have an Australian text, Australia, England, UK, Canada, those three for sure I know. Those three, the numbering is the same in all of those versions. The US version has a little bit different numbering, a little bit different. And then the U.S. Spanish translation numbering of the paragraphs is the same as the U.S. English. And all of those are different than the Latin editio typica. So all you need to know is that one thing that some pastoral ministers were concerned about is that when we went for the new translation, that the numbering would be required to conform to the Latin base text, which would mean all of our numbers would change. That didn't happen, at least in the U.S. In the U.S. version, the U.S. bishops approved the current numbering system, the reordering of some of the paragraphs, so that the numbering will stay the same. So, for example, paragraph 75 will remain paragraph 75. It won't change to something like 10 or whatever it is in the Latin.
And if you're wondering, what do you mean all of these numbers? In every ritual text and every church document, the references are not made using page numbers. It uses paragraph numbers. And so if someone says Rite of Christian Initiation of Adults, paragraph 4, it means turn to literally the 4th paragraph, and you'll see the number 4 on the left side of your ritual text. It doesn't mean turn to page 4. So that's really good news for us who have memorized all of the significant numbers in the current text.
So you promised us an update on the timeline.
Yes.
How does the timeline work from here?
So from here, we are early 2022. So the U.S. bishops have already approved that gray book draft that we talked about. And so the full U.S. text is going to the Vatican. We don't know for sure if that has already happened. Who knows? But once it gets to the Vatican...
Do they send it on the boat? Like it has
I don't know. I really have no clue how these things work. But sometime this year, it'll head to the Vatican, to the congregation there that looks at all of these translations, and they'll take a look at that. If they approve it, if they're like, hey, this is all great, this sounds wonderful, the earliest possible timeline then for us to use it will be sometime in 2023. But remember,
probably the later part of 2023.
Because remember, even once we get the approval from the Vatican, then the publishers need to start putting that into a whole layout system and get the paper. And you just talked today with a colleague.
A lot of the publishers are having trouble getting paper because of the supply chain issues going on. So we imagine that by 2023 that won't be an issue, but who knows, So the bottom line is, don't panic, don't change things right now. Don't start calling it OCIA. Yeah.
Don't continue calling it RCIA.
Yeah, that's independent of the new translation, but generally to refer to these rites by their initials is not helpful. It's maybe if you're in a meeting with colleagues and you just want a quick reference and to do it among ourselves, perhaps is okay. But when we start using OCIA or RCIA, we're using a lot of initials when we're talking to the seekers, even talking to other team members who are joining the team, and we're trying to train them, or sponsors or family members. It's just very, very difficult to help people understand that this is not a classroom experience or some sort of club that they're joining, but it's an encounter with the risen Christ. And so we want to use language that is more evocative and more descriptive of what's happening instead of shortening it to initials. So now that we're changing the title, we have an opportunity to take a pinky swear that we're not going to use the term OCIA in general usage. Instead, we'll talk about the order, or we'll talk about the rites, or we'll talk about the catechumenate, or we'll talk about the initiation process, or we'll talk about encountering Christ. Yeah. Those are all different ways to imagine the process and talk about it in a way that helps people get a visual picture of what's going on.
Yeah, so all of you here watching right now, swear to us, make a promise. We're going to do it with you. We're going to try really, really, really hard to not use the term RCIA or OCIA and use all of these other ways to describe this relationship with Christ. That's not a program, not a 10-month process, but really that encounter with Christ that changes all of us.
We mentioned that really it's just the language that's changing. The principles are not changing. Mm-hmm. The rights are not changing. The actions are not changing. And we have a short ebook that describes the core principles of the catechumenate process that come from the rite of Christian initiation of adults. And so we have a link.
I think
to that.
It's on there.
Yeah.
We're doing this from my phone. This is the first time using a link.
Right. So we have that link on the comments, and you can then go and get that ebook and review for yourselves and with your team what the 6 core principles of this catechumenate process are, and that will be your best preparation for the new translation. If you can't find it in the link there, just go to teamrci.com. And when the home page comes up, look in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, and there'll be a button there for where you can download the ebook.
Yep. So we are, if you've been following us on the road, you see we have a new background because we're in yet a completely different place of the state of Florida. Where are we? We are...
Florida.
Where in Florida?
Florida City.
Florida City. That is where we are. Florida City is kind of near Homestead, which I think is more familiar to some people. Homestead is right at the edge of the Everglades, which we have been exploring this past week. And this afternoon we're going to go airboating.
Yeah.
We've already seen alligators. We've seen a ton of different kinds of birds. Have been beautiful. We went kayaking yesterday, and then hopefully in the next day or so we'll head down even further south to Key West. So there you go.
All right, everyone. Well, as always, we're just so happy that you spent this time with us, and we're very, very grateful for all the ministry that you're doing in your parish to help seekers have this encounter with Christ.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week in a different location. All right, thanks.
All right, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.